On September 7th, 1191, 12,000 exhausted Crusaders, battered, bloodied, and pushed to the brink of collapse, turned and obliterated 30,000 of Saladin's finest warriors in just 17 minutes. What happened in those final moments at Arsuf would shatter the myth of Saladin's invincibility forever. 700 Crusader casualties, 7,000 Muslim dead, a 10-to-1 kill ratio that defied every law of medieval warfare. The fate of the Holy Land, and perhaps all of Christendom, hung on a single cavalry charge. By the end of this video, you'll understand how Richard the Lionheart orchestrated the most devastating counterattack in crusading history, why Saladin's greatest strength became his fatal weakness, and the 17 minutes that changed medieval warfare forever. But here's what the chronicles don't tell you. Richard had been waiting for this moment for 7 agonizing days. What made him wait until his men were dying? How could exhausted knights who'd marched for days in brutal heat suddenly explode with such devastating force? And why did Saladin's battle-hardened veterans, men who'd conquered most of the Holy Land, flee from an army they outnumbered more than 2-to-1? The answer lies in the deadliest weapon of the medieval world. Not the lance, not the sword, but something far more powerful: discipline forged in desperation. Jerusalem itself hung in the balance that September morning. The Third Crusade's survival depended on a single trumpet blast, a signal that would either save Christianity's presence in the Holy Land or see it drowned in blood. To understand how 12,000 men shattered 30,000, we need to step back 7 days to when 2 of history's greatest military minds began their deadly chess match on the coastal plains of the Levant. Richard had just secured Acre after a brutal 2-year siege. The Lionheart, King of England, Duke of Normandy, Count of Anjou, stood as Christendom's greatest warrior king. But across the dusty plains waited his match, Saladin, the Kurdish sultan whose very name meant righteous of the faith, the man who'd recaptured Jerusalem and shattered Crusader power at the disaster of Hattin just 4 years earlier. This wasn't just a battle between armies, it was a collision between 2 military philosophies, 2 faiths, and 2 men who respected each other even as they sought the other's destruction. After Hattin in 1187, where Saladin had annihilated the Crusader army and captured the True Cross, the Muslim world believed the Frankish threat was finished. Jerusalem had fallen. The coastal cities surrendered one by one. Christianity's century-old presence in the Holy Land seemed doomed. Then came the Third Crusade, and with it, Richard the Lionheart. The 33-year-old English king had already proven himself the finest military mind in Europe. But Saladin, at 53, commanded an empire stretching from Egypt to Syria, with decades of experience fighting Frankish knights. He knew their strengths, the devastating heavy cavalry charge, and he knew their weaknesses: heat, impatience, and the burden of their own armor. The next 60 seconds would determine the fate of the Holy Land. After taking Acre, Richard faced a critical decision: march inland directly to Jerusalem or secure the coast first. He chose the conservative route, south along the Mediterranean to Jaffa, keeping his fleet close for supplies. It seemed safe, logical, predictable. Saladin smiled when his scouts reported Richard's choice. The Sultan had been planning for exactly this move. The 80-mile coastal road from Acre to Jaffa passed through perfect ambush country. Rolling hills on the left, the sea on the right. No room to maneuver, nowhere to run. The Crusaders would be trapped in a narrow corridor of death. But here's what the chronicles don't tell you about these 2 commanders. They weren't just generals, they were students of each other. Richard had studied every battle Saladin had won. Saladin had interrogated, captured knights about Richard's tactics in Europe. Each knew the other's playbook. What followed would be more than a battle. It would be a masterclass in patience, deception, and the art of springing a trap on someone who knows it's there. As August turned to September, 30,000 Muslim warriors gathered in the hills above the coastal road. Richard's 12,000 men began their march south, knowing full well what awaited them. But as Richard's army began its march south, Saladin had already set his trap. The Sultan's strategy was elegant in its simplicity: bleed them slowly, break their discipline, then annihilate them when they finally snapped. The armies that gathered for this clash represented the pinnacle of medieval warfare. Richard's force of 12,000 was small but elite. At its heart, 2,000 mounted knights, including 300 Hospitallers in the vanguard, 300 Templars guarding the rear, warrior monks whose discipline was legendary. The remaining 1,400 knights came from England, France, Normandy, and the Crusader states. Each knight was a walking fortress, 40 pounds of chainmail, massive helm, kite shield, 12-foot lance, and broadsword. Supporting them, 10,000 infantry, half spearmen with shields, half crossbowmen whose bolts could punch through Muslim armor at 200 yards. But their greatest asset wasn't their weapons, it was their formation. Richard had drilled them relentlessly in a defensive box that moved like a single organism, shields overlapping, spears bristling outward, crossbowmen protected in the center. Then Saladin made his fatal error by choosing the wrong battlefield psychology. His host of 30,000 was built for mobility and harassment. The core, 10,000 Mamluk heavy cavalry, slave soldiers trained from childhood, the finest horsemen in the Islamic world. They wore lighter armor, leather and mail designed for speed, not prolonged melee. Their primary weapons, composite bows that could loose 12 arrows a minute, curved sabers for close combat, and most crucially, fresh horses, 3 or 4 per man. The remaining 20,000 were mixed forces, Bedouin light cavalry for scouting and harassment, Turkish horse archers, Kurdish infantry, and Egyptian regulars. But Saladin's real weapons were psychological, drums and cymbals to unnerve the enemy, dust clouds to obscure vision, and the constant rain of arrows designed to break resolve. The killing ground was set, but not how Saladin imagined. The coastal plain near Arsuf offered everything the Sultan needed. The ancient Roman road ran just 2 miles from the sea, bordered by sand dunes and scrubland that provided perfect cover for ambush. To the east, the forested hills of Samaria where Muslim cavalry could mass unseen. The Crusaders would have to march through a 10-mile gauntlet with the sea blocking retreat on their right, Saladin's army pressing from their left. But hidden in the ranks, one knight was about to change everything through sheer impatience. The stage was set for one of history's most dramatic reversals. The heat was already building. September in the Levant meant temperatures over 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Every Crusader carried at least 40 pounds of metal armor that would become an oven under the desert sun. Water was rationed. The nearest wells were in hostile territory. Richard understood the mathematics of attrition. Each day of marching in armor drained strength. Each hour under arrow fire tested discipline. Saladin was betting the Crusaders would break formation to charge their tormentors, and in the open ground, lighter Muslim cavalry would cut them to pieces. It had worked at Hattin. It had worked against every Frankish army for decades. The ground literally shook. Here's why. 30,000 horsemen were now shadowing the Crusader march. On September 3rd, as Richard's column departed Acre, Muslim outriders appeared on the eastern hills. The chess match had begun. Every piece was in position. 2 brilliant commanders, each believing they could predict the other's moves. What Richard did next defied every rule of medieval warfare. Instead of rushing to cover the 80 miles to Jaffa